everybody, this is Hole's Hummus Life here again, and I hope you're having a great day, lots of smiles, lots of joy, and I am talking about zoos today with a very special guest that you all may know, but if you don't, you're in for a treat. Just to let you know, this is actually very serious, but not when we're together because we're very silly people. Okay, bye. I'll try again. Don't laugh at me.
I'm not laughing at you, I'm just laughing.
Okay, so this is my good friend. Shall I say that we're together? We're talking today about how zoos are not as bad as people think. I used to think they were very bad and not very nice for the animals, but this person right here has taught me that it's better. Steve Irwin here does wildlife conservation at Salford University, so he knows his stuff. So, first question, are you ready?
Yeah.
Are you ready, guys? Actually, first off, let's just introduce ourselves to these wonderful animals here.
So this is Gerald, the reticulated giraffe from the plains of Africa, given to me by my good friend David at Ambra.
Wow.
And then this is Tina the tiger, and she was given to me by our good friend Steve Owen before he passed away. Bless him.
Right, so these are like the stereotypes of what people say about zoos. They aren't living in their natural habitat.
Yeah, I used to have the same opinion as you. I used to think zoos were horrible and then I went and educated myself at uni about the matter, and everyone seems to think that the wild and the natural habitat is like, they've got like the same opinion as the zebra in Madagascar, how it's all perfect and wonderful. In actual fact, a lot of animals will die prematurely either from disease or predation or starvation or drought. And a lot of animals, you know, if you're a prey animal, you're on edge a lot of the time. You're spending a lot of the time moving, using up a lot of energy to try and avoid predators. And if you're a predator, like 60% of your hunts are successful, and so you're at risk at starvation a lot of the time. And, you know, it's not a very nice time living in the wild. I wouldn't like to go and live in the wild as a human being. I like a warm bed at night, food, and not dying of disease.
But sometimes, like, these animals, they're, you know, meant to be in the wild, so...
Yeah, but these animals that you see as a lot of Western zoos have never been in the wild. They've been born in zoos and traded between zoos. And there are also, a lot of zoos do create insurance populations for conservation projects. So they have population of animals either behind the scenes most of the time that you can't see because they are not allowed to interact with humans, that will be used and will be released to the wild. There are a lot of conservation projects in zoos that will release animals into the wild, especially for endangered species that need the help.
Nice. But there is a big thing about how people say it can be, you know, animals in the zoos can just be used for money and entertainment as well.
Well, entertainment is a big part of it because that keeps people coming back, but the money that you spend on entering a zoo, most of that will go on feeding the animals. Edinburgh Zoo one year spent about £80,000 on bamboo just for their giant pandas in a year. And after that, when all the feeding has been done, then there's conservation work and conservation projects that they are doing in this country and abroad, which a lot of money goes on to. A lot of the functions of a zoo are education, entertainment, conservation, and that's all underpinned by animal welfare. You know, no one likes going to a zoo where they think animals are being mistreated, and the general public can tell if an animal is being mistreated. And then after the food and the conservation projects, then there's the bills and the right equipment for the animals that need to be paid for, and then there's the staff. So really, it's not like a big capitalist money-making scheme that a lot of people think it is.
Thanks for that one.
It's alright.
But don't you think that it's cruel towards the animals because it's like a prison for them? Like they don't really get enough space and stuff as they should do.
There are a set of laws. There are minimum requirements. If you are to purchase a zoo license, you need to make sure that each species you're exhibiting has the minimum space requirements, and you can even go and access that online and see what the requirements the zoos are having to obey by. And zoo animals are taken care of really well. There's so many books on wild animal husbandry. They get medicated, they get veterinary care if they are ill, they are fed every day, they're watered every day, they're kept at right temperatures, they're kept comfortable, they're not in any horrible scenarios. They might be in the wild, you know, they're not getting chased down by a pride of lions, you know, they're just chilling, you know, just in an exhibit, getting taken care of.
So what parts do you actually think, like, that are bad about zoos?
So in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to have zoos. Obviously, we know that, but we don't live in a perfect world. You know, in a perfect world, people wouldn't be committing animal abuse most of the times they sat down to eat a meal. But
Dig.
But there's things like, you know, there are probably like SeaWorld. That's obviously a big no-no. But we don't have any cetacean parks in the UK because if we did, they'd be shut down within a week. But there are some big issues with zoos. There's elephants, for example. On average, they're living to about half of their wildlife span. And in a lot of zoos, they are obese because they're just a huge animal. And they do need a lot of space to roam because they are a roaming animal. They have a large home range. I just don't think there's enough space to keep them in. So there's been like zoos that have tried to get away around that by exercising the elephants, by giving them a treat if they run to one end of the exhibit and back. But then that calls into a question of ethics as to whether the elephant wants to do that. And then people will be like, well, the elephant doesn't want to do this. And then there's also problems like polar bears in captivity are a big issue. They exhibit a lot of stereotypy behaviour, which is like pacing up and down and scratching at things and gnawing at like walls and stuff. But having said that, Yorkshire Wildlife Park have a huge polar bear enclosure, and the polar bears that they rescued and took to their zoo, their stereotypy behaviour went down by 80%. And there's also a question of longevity in zoos with animals actually living too long. And so we had a talk by someone from the Natural History Museum of London at university, and he showed us animal bones that had been sent to them by animals that passed away in zoos. And a lot of them have osteophytes, which are like bone growths, and you can see where bones have been worn away from cartilage because naturally they don't live that long. They can't really then euthanize the animal if they know it's in pain, because that will cause a public outrage. People are, why have you euthanized this endangered animal? But it's also in pain. So there's sort of a lot of controversy around that. A lot of zoos will just have to keep animals on medication going even though they're really old. But having said that, you know, most Western zoos nowadays are good zoos. They do a lot of work conservation-wise because the funding is just not there, especially in third world countries where, you know, they don't have a lot of money anyway. They're not going to spend that on animals. So a lot of work needs to be done in foreign countries, and a lot of that is done by zoos. Like Chester Zoo have recently installed rope bridges in like Borneo and Sumatra for the orangutans, so they can get through fragmented forests using these rope bridges, and they are being used. There's been evidence of the orangutans actually using that, and that's great work that has been done by the zoo, and that can only be done if people go to the zoo and support the zoos. But yeah, there are some bad zoos. It's best just to do your research. I've been to like a lot of zoos last year as part of my course, and I went to like Dudley Zoo. I didn't think that was a great zoo. A lot of the enclosures were small, and I'm not a big fan of Twycross Zoo. I know they do a lot of primate work, but when I went there, it was the same again with the enclosures.
What does primate mean?
Monkeys and apes.
Oh, primates means monkeys and apes.
Yeah. But yeah, most Western zoos are good zoos. I'd recommend Yorkshire Wildlife Park and Chester Zoo. And there's the Scotland Highland Park that have recently got a polar bear cub. That's the first time that it's been successfully bred in captivity for 25 years. Yeah, so basically, if you're going to a Western zoo, most of the time, still do your research, but most of the time they're good zoos. But it's things when you're abroad, you've got to look out for some things like elephant rides are just not good. You know, you get these people that are like, they won't go to zoos, and then they'll have a life-changing trip in India where they rode an elephant, and it was so incredible, and they got 700 likes on Instagram.
And like they also think like the elephant riding, it's like, oh yeah, well they're in the wild so it's fine. It's like, well, they're probably being mistreated even worse in that area, or like in that job, because it is more entertainment than it is like in zoos, because zoos, they're more like freely roaming around the enclosure than like just having people watch them, whereas entertainment is more like people sitting on the animals or taking photos with them as the animals are probably drugged so as they can actually take a photo.
Oh, they can take a photo.
God, emotional. No, taking a photo with them. Like, they're probably drugged in order to get the photo.
There's also some alternatives that you can do if you go to a place where the indigenous population of wild animals are found there, such as like unzoos, where I've been to one in Borneo with the orangutans, and it was on a large reserve, and they have a platform in the middle of the reserve where they feed them twice a day. And so the orangutans have this whole reserve to go around, and they'll come down to this platform to feed because they know they're going to get fed there. And they can, you know, they have a choice whether they want to go down and get that bit of extra food or not. And so it's completely up to them, which I think is a nice alternative, but you can't have that for every species. There's not enough room for the reserves to be able to do that for every species, and there's also species in captivity that are extinct in the wild, so it would be impossible to do that with them. Yeah.
Oh, boys. Nice. Bye. See you next time.